Good Tuesday morning. Good Tuesday morning of the 13th week. This is a great gospel. But I think you have to, no, you don't have to do anything. But if you've grown up on the water, I grew up on Long Island Sound, which is equivalent to the Atlantic Ocean, okay? All right, you don't see the other shore. And the waters are tidal. And when you get a storm, it's a storm. It's an oceanic storm, okay? You got to know that. Or where I learned when I went to Dunkirk, New York, and stationed there as a seminarian 60-something years ago, Lake Erie and the lakes there, okay? They're equivalent to the ocean. You can't see the other side. And by God, when there were storms, holy moly, Andy, they were violent, okay? You had to know that. That's the story here, and I'll show it to you. You've got to appreciate. I have a plaque. A person, it's not a plaque, it's a thing you stick on your boat, okay? It's I don't know what you call a medallion, and it says, "Oh God, how big is your ocean? How small is my boat? Oh God, how big is your ocean? How small is my boat?" Trust me. And it's the image of life. How big is life? How small is the church? And yet it's in the church that we can weather the storms and survive and flourish and live. That's the image here. That's the analogy. Watch it. Jesus got, and this is Matthew, as Jesus got into a boat, his disciples followed him. Suddenly, and this you've got to again grow up in a large body of water, suddenly a violent storm came up on the sea, and we used to say that all the time. You watch the sky as much as you watch the water. And if you saw something emerging, especially from the west, given New England, okay, you knew you were facing the storm, okay? Same here. When I think of storms, I always look west to see what's coming our way. Of course, in the East Coast, you got storms coming off the Northeast, okay? The Arctic, okay? Northeaster is one butt-kicking storm. You know you're going to get your brains knocked out, okay? Listen to Lily defending the world, okay? You see? That's the truth. I was saying the West. It's a combination of West in general, but a Northeaster, Sadie, bar the door. Get off the water. You have no business being out there. So this is what happens. Suddenly a violent storm came up in the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by waves. But he, Christ, was asleep. They came and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're perishing." He said to them, "Why are you terrified, O you of little faith?" Then he got up, he rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. The men were amazed and said, "What sort of man is this, whom even the winds and the sea obey?" The great storms of life obey, you see. Christ seems to be absent, and yet the storm of life is so violent. Can you imagine the early church when Matthew wrote this thing? They're getting their brains knocked out, and Christ appears to be asleep. He's not present, and the storms were real. This was the age of martyrdom. To be a Christian, here Matthew talking to Jewish Christians, they were getting their brains knocked out. They were taking a beating. Just a violent storm. And Christ seems so absent. You think of the age of martyrs, the various ages of martyrs, when Christ seems so absent. Yet paradoxically, it was the blood of the martyrs. We fill up those things wanting in the suffering of Christ. And it was the blood of the martyrs that converted the Romans, changed the world. The blood of the martyrs. But why? What a storm. What a storm. I think from the Jewish tradition, I think about this a lot because they don't have Christ, but they have their suffering. My God, they have their suffering. And I think maybe out of the Holocaust, the horrors of the Holocaust, the state of Israel, which I think has emerged. And I think for many Jews, and I think I'd be one of them if I were Jewish, I would see Israel, the state of Israel, as being a redemptive figure, have a redemptive character. I mean that. The suffering that those people went through. It's incredible. And that the remnant who survived built a state. It's redemption from where I'm sitting. I know I'm right too. And we have our own storms. They're not the storms of genocide, but the storms of human fear, suffering, disease, heartache. The human community is a storm-like community. We are in an ocean at times calm and at times violent. It's one of the beauties of growing on the East Coast, or growing on any coast that you face the ocean, because it has no respect. It's a great symbol of life. It has no respect. When it storms, and it's oblivious who's on the beach or who's on the water. That's why you learn to respect the water, respect the air and the wind. That's a true lesson. I mean, I learned that from my father, but I learned a lesson from my father as well. As in the ocean and the storms, so is life. My father was a realist. He didn't expect more of life than he could give, but he lived it with vigor. He lived it with vigor. If he was eating a steak, it was the perfectly cooked steak, but same with a fried egg. And he didn't ask the egg to taste like a steak. You see? He taught me how to reverence life, even in its violent moments. You see? I think that's the image here. And of course, the boat is the boat of the church. That's the church. She gets whacked around historically, and she gets right at a given moment. In this case, she's being practically swamped. The early church was practically swamped by martyrdom and all the rest. And yet she not only survived, she flourished in the storm and through the storm, the blood of the martyrs, and she still does. The church has been persecuted over and over again historically. I think we're facing the new era of persecution in the church. It won't be violent, I don't think, in the West. It'll be subtle. It'll be the persecution of doubt and blame by the secular mind. And I see that emerging more and more, especially the church, not necessarily all Christianity, but the church, because the church stands for something with an authoritative voice of Christ. She doesn't say, let's accommodate. She says, this is the truth. And we live in an age where the truth is hostilely observed, but barely received. We don't like the truth. We like the conventions of opinion, what we call it political correctness. We like the whims of the moment. Anyone who has any concept of the history of culture knows this is a dangerous period we live in, because we have become whimsical about matters of immense importance in life. We've politicized truth. That's just simply the truth. And that becomes a force in which the counter voice is the church. It's the ship of Peter. And at times it's going to be the boat. It's going to feel flooded and flushed, overwhelmed, but she won't sink. And to stay faithful to her, to stay in the boat. There's another lesson. I'll give you one before this ends. A lesson if you learn this thing, again on big water, never leave the boat. See? Never leave the boat. If you capsize, stay with the boat. It's not going to sink. You stay with the boat. If you try to swim, you'll drown. But if you stay with the boat, you'll survive. My dad gave me bad advice one time, just one time. We didn't have an outboard motor. It was 1952 or 3. It's a long time ago, 70 years ago. And anyway, we're out on the water, and we hit a storm. It wasn't a storm, it was wind, and the wind was coming off. It's called an offshore wind. It was pushing out into the water, and my father couldn't row against it. And I was just a kid. I was around 10, 11 years old. So he tied, this shows you the love of a father. We didn't have life jackets. We had life cushions, and he tied my cushion and his cushion to me. So I had a cushion in my back and a cushion up front tied with fishing line. So there's no way that I was going to sink, okay? I was going to I had 2 life preservers. That's what we called them, life preservers. But he didn't have any. And the only advice he gave me, he says, if we capsize, there was a small island about a quarter of a mile away. He said, swim to that island. You'll be safe there. He would drown if we capsized, but I would survive. The only bad advice was to swim to the island. If I were given the advice, I said, stick with the boat. You got your life jacket, hang on to the boat. The boat will save you. You see, the boat will save you. See, okay? It was just advice of a father for his son. The church will save you in its turbulent time, no matter how capsized it may look and how beaten up it may be. It will save you. See, it will save you. If you abandon the boat, you'll drown. And our culture is just trying to abandon the boat. It's going to swim into the storm, and the storm is unforgiving.